The world's most powerful family dynasty is not the British royal family. It is not any royal house in the Middle East. It is a family running a country that does not even believe in dynasties. North Korea calls itself a communist state, a government of the people, built on equality. But the same bloodline has controlled it for over 70 years, 3 generations, 0 elections. And anyone who gets too close to challenging that power ends up disappearing. So how does a communist country become a family business? This is the story. It starts not with Kim Jong Un, and not even with his father. It starts with his grandfather. Kim Il-sung was born in 1912 under brutal Japanese colonial rule. Korea at the time had been stripped of its language, its culture, and its sovereignty. Koreans were forbidden from using their own language in schools, forced to take Japanese names, and conscripted into Japanese factories and military units to serve an empire that viewed them as a lower class of people. The occupation had lasted since 1910 and showed no signs of ending. Fighting back meant risking everything. Kim Il-sung did it anyway. He spent his early life as a guerrilla fighter, moving through the mountains along the Chinese border, surviving on instinct and ideology. He was tough. He was charismatic. And when Japan surrendered in 1945, the Soviet Union moved into the northern half of Korea and needed someone to put in charge. They picked Kim Il-sung. Not because he was the most qualified. There were other fighters with equally strong claims. But he had Soviet backing, and in the post-war world, that was everything. Therefore, he was installed as the leader of the North, and he got to work immediately, pushing out rivals, building a loyal military, and constructing a state entirely around himself. Then the Korean War happened. It should have weakened him. North Korea was physically devastated, but Kim Il-sung spun it into something else entirely. North Korea had gone to war with the most powerful military on Earth and survived. Therefore, he used that survival as the foundation of something the world had rarely seen, a cult of personality. His image went into every home in the country, every public building. Portraits of Kim Il-sung were required to be hung at a specific height on the wall, kept clean, and treated with reverence. If a fire broke out, citizens were expected to save the portrait before their own belongings. His words were treated as sacred truth. A philosophy was built around his rule called Juche, which translated roughly to self-reliance. Meaning North Korea did not need the outside world, and absolute loyalty to the leader was the highest virtue any citizen could possess. Schools taught children to thank Kim Il-sung for their food before eating. His birthday became the most important holiday in the country. Citizens received special food rations on that day, gifts from the leader, reinforcing the idea that everything they had came from him personally. Think about that. What kind of system makes children thank a living man for their meals? This was communism in name, but it was monarchy in practice. In genuine communist theory, the state serves the collective. Power belongs to the working class, but what Kim Il-sung built was the opposite. The state served him, power belonged to him. The communist language stayed because it was useful. It kept the Soviet Union and China sending money and military support, but the substance was closer to a royal court than anything Karl Marx ever imagined. So if it was not really communism, what was it? A dictatorship wearing communism clothes. For decades, Kim Il-sung ruled without serious challenge, but then he started getting old, and a question emerged that had no clean answer inside a communist framework. Who comes next? In a real communist state, leadership passes through party structures, committees, collective decisions. No communist country had ever simply handed power to the leader's son. Doing so would expose the entire system as a lie. It would make it obvious to every North Korean that what they were living under was not the People's Republic described in their textbooks. It was a family dictatorship. Therefore, Kim Il-sung could not just announce his son as the next leader. More patient, more calculated. He spent decades engineering it. His son, Kim Jong Il, was born in 1941 and grew up entirely inside the bubble of the North Korean elite. He was educated, passionate about film and the arts, and deeply devoted to his father. Through the 1970s and 1980s, Kim Jong Il was quietly moved up through the party and military. Given titles, given influence, given the kind of visibility that told the entire North Korean establishment that something was coming. State media began describing him in reverential terms. He was called the Dear Leader. His image started appearing alongside his father's. And then the regime did something remarkable. They constructed an entire mythology around his birth. He had been born on a sacred mountain during a blizzard, heralded by a double rainbow and a new star in the sky. Sound familiar? It is the exact kind of mythology that gets built around kings, not party officials. None of this happened by accident. It was a long, deliberate campaign to make the unthinkable feel inevitable. Therefore, by the time Kim Il-sung passed away in 1994, the succession was not a shock. It was not a power struggle. It was just the next step in a transition that had been quietly managed for 20 years. The grief that followed was extraordinary. Citizens weep in the streets. It was broadcast around the world. Some of it was genuine, from people raised since birth to see this man as a further figure and something close to a god. But some of it was almost certainly performed because in North Korea, not grieving convincingly enough is a dangerous choice. Kim Il-sung was not buried. He was embalmed and placed on permanent public display. He was given the title Eternal President of the Republic. North Korea is technically still led by a dead man. Every leader since governs beneath him in the official hierarchy. Kim Jong Il took over and ruled differently, more reclusive, less natural commanding in public. He governed through fear, patronage, and an almost total information blackout that kept North Koreans cut off from the outside world. Radios were hardwired to receive only state broadcasts. Televisions could only access state channels. Owning foreign media was a serious crime. Most North Koreans had no idea what life looked like beyond their borders, which meant they had no frame of reference to measure how abnormal their own lives were. But then the famine hit. In the mid-1990s, catastrophic food shortages swept through the country. Poor agricultural policy, economic collapse, the loss of Soviet funding after the USSR fell apart, and bad harvests combined to produce mass starvation. Somewhere between several 100,000 and over 1 million people lost their lives. The government's response was to protect the military and the elite and leave ordinary citizens to survive however they could. And yet the regime did not fall. How does a government survive letting 1 million of its own people starve? Total control. When there is no outside information, no freedom of movement, and no way to organize, even catastrophic failure does not become revolution. Kim Jong Il held on. He ruled for 17 years. But he was aging, his health was declining, and the same problem his father had once solved was back. Who comes next? This time, the preparation had been far less methodical. Kim Jong Un had multiple sons from different relationships. His eldest was reportedly passed over after he was caught trying to enter Japan on a false passport, apparently to visit a theme park. His second son was considered too gentle, too uninterested in power. That left the youngest, Kim Jong Un. The man who would go on to run one of the most feared governments on the planet essentially got the job because his brothers were disqualified. One for sneaking into a theme park, one for being too soft. It is almost impossible to believe, but it is what happened. Kim Jong-un was born somewhere around 1983 or 1984, though even his birth year was kept deliberately vague for years. He had been educated partly in Switzerland, attending a regular state school under a fake name alongside ordinary children, taking the bus, eating in the school canteen, reportedly obsessed with basketball and video games. He lived in a country where citizens were free to think, speak, travel, and criticize their government. Then he came home to one of the most repressive states on earth and prepared to run it. The contradiction sits at the heart of everything. The man who would imprison his own people for accessing foreign media had spent years living freely inside exactly the kind of open society he would go on to deny them. He returned to North Korea, went through military and party training, and in the final years of his father's life began to appear beside him in official photographs. He was given military titles. He was called the Great Successor. The machine that had elevated his father was being pointed at him. Kim Jong Il passed away in December 2011. Kim Jong Un was around 27 years old, one of the youngest heads of state anywhere in the world. Outside observers generally questioned whether he could hold on, whether older generals or party officials with more experience or more connections would push this young, untested man aside. Those questions were answered fast. Within a few years, Kim Jong Un moved against anyone he saw as a threat. Officials were removed. Some were reportedly executed. His own uncle, one of the most powerful figures in the entire regime and widely seen as the man who might actually be running things behind the scenes, was publicly purged and executed in 2013. A few years later, his estranged half-brother was assassinated in a Malaysian airport, apparently on the orders of the North Korean state. Kim Jong Un was not going to be managed. He was not going to be a figurehead. And what clearer message could there be than executing your own uncle in front of the entire political class? Nobody needed a second warning. North Korea today is one of the most closed societies on Earth, armed with nuclear weapons, governed by a family now in its third generation of absolute rule. The Kim family has outlawed the Soviet Union that created Kim Il-sung. It has outlasted every expert prediction that the regime would eventually collapse. It has survived famine, sanctions, and total isolation. It is not communism, it never really was. It is a dynasty, built on the bones of an ideology wearing its clothes. And the most remarkable thing about it is that the entire world can see exactly what it is, and the family is still standing.